Hi there. My name is Forrest Valkai with the Atheist community of Austin. We're an organization that challenges religious belief with an open and inclusive environment through call-in shows and debates and general education. And today, my friends and I are going to be taking on the top 10 questions that atheists supposedly can't answer. These are the most frequently asked questions that we get all the time, presented in a way that they're supposed to be difficult or challenging or somehow unanswerable. And I think you'll find over the course of this video that not only are these answerable questions, they're easy questions. And if you think that they're hard-hitting, I think you need to spend a little bit more time talking to actual atheists. So grab some popcorn, settle in, and get ready to learn what atheists actually believe. Or don't believe, I suppose.
Do you really believe that science is the only answer to all of life's questions?
Very no, for several reasons. First of all, science is not some tome of knowledge that we go and refer to when we want to learn something. That's simply not how it works. Science is just a tool for learning more things about the universe. It's the way that we find out new stuff. It's the way that we explore and probe and learn about the universe around us. It's not just something that we just draw answers from. It's something that we build answers with. But in the spirit that this question was asked, as science is this opposition to religion, do I really think that there's a naturalistic explanation for every single thing? Sure, there absolutely is a naturalistic explanation for every single thing, but that doesn't mean that it's the answer to all life's questions. I don't think that there's a mathematical equation that's going to help you decide where you should go to university or whether or not you should have another kid or what you should eat for lunch today. That just doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of things that are just personal, subjective choices. But in terms of the big, important questions, the questions that people have been asking since people began being people, where are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? Where does life begin and what happens after it ends? These big questions that plague our minds and stretch our brains all the time, those are things that science absolutely can and has already begun to answer quite well. We're fortunate enough to live in a time right now where we have at least half of most of those answers, and the ones that we don't have, we have half of the answer at least on those as well. So the more we learn, the more we'll be able to learn. And the best part about science is that whenever you answer a question, you gain 3 new questions to ask. So, of course, I don't think that science is the answer to all questions forever, but in terms of the ones that matter, absolutely yes.
If God doesn't exist, why do you care if people worship him?
Well, I do care because people who worship God, no matter what that God is, tend to want to put that God into the politics of the country in which they live. We're seeing that now in our country with this big wave of Christian nationalism. We're seeing it in India with the Hindutva. And these are the reasons that I think that we need to move away from people believing in religion and get people more educated to a secular way of life.
Seriously, can nothing create something?
Well, setting aside how memey this is and how telling it is that the person hasn't actually engaged with very many atheists, I don't really know very many people that hold this position. I do know a lot of theists that hold this position, however, because a lot of them believe in creatio ex nihilo, right? They believe that God created something from nothing. He didn't have any working material. He didn't have Play-Doh. He had nothing. He had to just will it from nothing into existence. So I'm very skeptical on that take to begin with, but you don't actually have to hold this view as an atheist. You could hold the view that the universe is infinite. There's just an infinite series of past events, or you could hold a view that I'm very sympathetic to, which is that there's a necessary initial state. So theists want to say that God necessarily exists. When we ask the question, why is there something rather than nothing, typically a theist will say, well, God necessarily exists. He has to exist. I don't see why that chess move isn't available to a naturalist or an atheist who can just say, well, the initial moment of time, t equals 0, t equals 1, is the beginning of the universe. It has to exist. There is no way that that couldn't have existed. And you shave off a lot of ontological baggage. You don't have to appeal to a divine realm. You don't have to appeal to angels or jinns or genies or demons. You don't have to pack any of that into your view to get this way more parsimonious, simpler view that has a nice trade-off between the commitments that you hold to and the explanatory power that you get out of it. I see God as an idle wheel in that explanation, and you don't have to posit that something came from nothing, but rather you could say that something had to exist, that being the initial natural state of reality. There isn't anything prior to that, doesn't come from anything, doesn't come from nothing, it doesn't come from a God, and you can call yourself an atheist.
If you've never been to the ends of the earth, if you've never been to every planet, if you've never been to every part of the universe, how do you know that God doesn't exist?
I have no indication that I'm supposed to be looking for God on other planets or in other parts of the universe. To me, what this sounds like is post hoc rationalism that just comes from a long timeline of new discoveries. Each time the universe expands, each time Christian scholars are proven wrong about what it is we're supposed to believe on this planet, we have to listen to religious sycophants and ideologues come up with new ways to determine where God may exist, where he may live, and where should we be looking. When in all actuality, there's no reason whatsoever, no precedent for us to be looking anywhere other than this very planet that we inhabit. No religious text, no religious teaching that I've ever come across tells me that I need to be looking anywhere. Not only does it not do that, but it doesn't tell me some of the basics of the most concept problems or understandings that we have today, whether it be science in general, medicine, exploration of the New World, many of the historic trends that have taken place, all completely baseless when it comes to religion. So I would start here, if I were looking for God, on planet Earth, and to my knowledge, we've found nothing yet.
What is the origin of life?
There's a lot that we do and don't know here, so we'll start with what we do know and we'll move on from there. What we do know is that the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old. Now, at about 4 billion years ago, the Hadean period ended. And in this time, we were in a stage called the Late Heavy Bombardment. The Earth was getting pummeled by rocks from space constantly. The entire surface of the planet was a molten hellscape upon which no life could possibly exist. 4 billion years ago, that time ends. And we know for sure that life started at the very, very latest, like the quickest evidence that we have is around 3.7 to 3.8 billion years ago. So you have about 0.2 billion years, 200 million years after the Earth cools down and stops getting pummeled by space rocks all the time to when life starts. That's remarkably quick. 200 million years might sound like a really long time to you or I, but in geological time, that is a blink of an eye. That's nothing. So life starting in that relatively very small amount of time at least indicates a little bit that it's somewhat easy to do. Now, that might lead some people to ask, well, why don't we see new life starting all the time today? A couple of things about that. Number one, if new life were to start, it would be very, very simple and very, very small. So it would be very difficult for us to tell where and when to check for that happening. It's not like we would just see a new giraffe pop into existence. That's not how that would work. And also, if life were to start today, it would necessarily have to start in an environment that is super nutrient dense and like perfect prime living conditions for even the most basic living things. That type of area would immediately get swarmed by bacteria. New life would not be able to start because existing life would take over it. But that's neither here nor there. That's a complete aside. Back to what we do know about the origin of life. What you need to understand is that all life is made of 4 basic things. There are 4 major macromolecules that make up every single living thing. And those are proteins, which are made of amino acids, lipids, which are made of fatty acids, carbohydrates, which are made of sugars, and nucleic acids, which are made of nitrogenous bases. There's a few more parts to those things, but those are the most important parts. That's all we're going to talk about today. We can get into the details later. And there have been plenty of experiments in chemical evolution showing that simple inorganic molecules can form these complex organic molecules here on Earth. And those experiments are often criticized by creationists, saying that somebody's fudging the numbers or tweaking the knobs or contaminating the vials. But the nail in the coffin here is that we have found all of those things in space too. Space where there notoriously isn't anybody fudging the numbers or tweaking the knobs or contaminating the vials. If we find sugars and amino acids and fatty acids and nitrogenous bases out on asteroids and meteors and in meteorites that crash on Earth, it isn't because some scientist accidentally messed something up and put them there. It's because those things self-assembled right out there in space. So we have a tremendous amount of evidence showing that the building blocks of life self-assemble in both laboratory and natural settings under remarkably mundane conditions. And when you compound that knowledge with the knowledge that I just brought up earlier, that life got started here very, very quickly, it kind of becomes a lot more difficult to say that life starting on its own is impossible. All of the building blocks can self-assemble, and it started here really, really quickly with all of the building blocks already here. They would have been, the processes that we know create them were already going on right here. So even though there are some parts that we don't know, that doesn't mean we don't know anything. And that's really important, because if you were to boil down everything that we know about abiogenesis to like 10 rhetorical steps, we would know steps 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, and 10. And there's a lot of creationists out there that like to pretend that not knowing step 4 or step 9 is the same thing as just not knowing anything. And that simply doesn't make any sense. Abiogenesis is a burgeoning field of biology. Astrobiologists are working very, very hard every single day to try to figure this out. And we've made huge strides over the past couple of decades. So again, if you think that this is a hard-hitting argument, that we don't know where life comes from, I have two challenges for you. Number one, what would you have said with this argument just 20 years ago when we didn't know for sure where nitrogenous bases came from or how they self-assemble, when we didn't have half of the evidence that we have today, when we didn't have, say, steps 5 or step 3? Would you have used the same argument then? And how would that argument have changed now when we have those gaps filled in? And then also, what will you say in 20 more years when the gaps that we have now are filled in as well? Because what this God of the gaps argument inevitably boils down to is you don't know how this works, therefore God, or we do know how this works and it's all too intricate, therefore God. And that simply isn't good enough for me.
If humans are animals, then where does our sense of morality, justice, and sense of right and wrong come from?
That's actually pretty easy, and it's covered by biology, because cooperation is a survival strategy. And we see this survival strategy being applied across multiple species that are very social. The more social the species, the more cooperation that is required. So meerkats, for instance, will often alert their entire group to predators at risk of their own life. And humans did that. We consider that moral behavior, but it's meerkats doing it. Is that moral? I don't know. Morals are simply an opinion. And so we see this over and over again. We even see bacteria that have fairly complex responses to other bacteria cheating on them when they start cooperating. So where does that come from? If you're going to claim that morality comes from God, you now have more to explain, not less. When we look at evolution and we realize that cooperation is a viable strategy for survival, now we can explain it in every species that we see behavior we label as moral.
If you were given irrefutable evidence that the God of the Bible is real, would you become a Christian?
I need to clarify this a little bit, because depending upon your denomination, I was a Christian. I was a Roman Catholic, in fact. And before I answer the question, I'm basing everything on the knowledge of the Christian God as he has been described in the Bible. That being said, if you've seen our shows, you know we have a lot of hosts who are experts in various fields. We have people who are knowledgeable in science. We have people who are knowledgeable in philosophy, in history, and a lot of other topics that I could not even begin to address intelligently. So what I'm going to try to do is explain it in my realm of experience, you might say. The Christian God has often been depicted as a father figure. Depending on your religion, I believe Catholicism said that he was the husband of the church. I am a father, I am a husband. So I'd like to kind of compare and contrast the differences I feel exist between myself and this God. The God of the Bible demands worship. In the 10 Commandments, the first few commandments are all about him, because everything is about him. As a father and a husband, I actively discourage worship. I don't want my child to see me as this figure who can make no mistakes, who is perfect. I don't want worship, and I feel like any entity that demands worship is not worthy of being worshipped. The God of the Bible devalues women. The opinion of a man is worth 2 to 3 or sometimes 4. He talks about women cannot be in positions of authority. No woman is allowed to hold authority over a man or teach. I'm exactly the opposite, and I recognize the intrinsic value of my wife and my daughter as they are. I feel extremely lucky to have them in my life. They provide to me a quality of life that I don't feel like I would get otherwise. The God of the Bible uses threats to get what he wants, the biggest threat being that of hell. Do what I say, worship me, or you'll get eternal punishment. I, on the other hand, work to try to earn the respect and love of my family. I am in no way inclined to believe that I am better than them. In many ways, I am worse than them, but I think there is a kind of synergy that evolves. I have certain strengths, my family has certain strengths, and together we can come to some agreement or make our lives better. But in no way do I feel like I have to threaten them to do what I want. God of the Bible discourages knowledge. In many passages in the Bible, knowledge is a terrible thing not to be achieved. Faith in itself is that denial of achieving knowledge. I, on the other hand, highly encourage both my wife and my daughter at every point. If there's an educational topic that they're interested in, I want them to explore it. I want them to gain the knowledge, because it is one of the things that I feel is most discouraged, especially in the current. Knowledge is looked upon as a bad thing. Just believe, just have the faith. And my last comparison is that the God of the Bible leads by command. He has an entire book full of his commands that says what you should do, what you shouldn't do, how you should treat certain people, how you can take other people and make them your slaves, how you can kill other people simply because they don't believe what you believe. I, on the other hand, try to lead, and I'm using the word lead a little more loosely, but I try to lead by example. I don't feel that I can require any more goodness out of people than I am willing to display myself. And I feel like that is something that has paid dividends for me in my life. To kind of wrap things up and to change the question a little bit, if I was given irrefutable evidence that the God of the Bible was real, would I become a Christian again? No, for one simple reason, and that's because I refuse to participate in a religion whose deity is more of an ass than I am.
If evolution is real, and if it is really happening, how come there are no transitional forms that we can observe?
Number 8. If evolution is real and is really happening, how come there are no transitional forms that we can observe? 2 really important notes about this. Number 1, there are lots and lots of transitional forms that we can observe. You just have to go look for them. We can talk easily about things like Archaeopteryx, which was a transition between reptiles and birds, or Tiktaalik, which is a transition between fish and tetrapods. There are very clear examples of organisms that have some ancestral traits and some derived traits and have this kind of blended line between 2 major taxa. And what inevitably happens when you bring those up to creationists is they just say, no, that's actually just this thing or that thing, and they never agree on which one of the things that it is. But that actually brings us to the real point of it. The real honest truth is that even amongst evolutionary biologists, these lines are fuzzy. If you had every single skeleton from me to my parents to their parents to their parents going all the way back millions and millions of years back to our common ancestor with chimpanzees 7 or 9 million years ago, you would not be able to pick one single skeleton among them and say, that's where the humans start. This one is a human and everything before it isn't. Because that's simply not how evolution works. It's a fuzzy gradient. It isn't like there was a day that a chicken gave birth to a donkey. That's simply not how anything works ever, and nobody's claiming that. So if you ever hear a creationist say, when have you seen a dog give birth to a non-dog? That person doesn't know how evolution actually works. The simple fact of the matter is, every single form is a transitional form. We are all evolutionary steps. Everything that is currently alive today is as evolved as everything else that is alive today, because evolution is not a ladder. There's no peak, there's no top, there's no goal. It's a fuzzy gradient, and and whatever allows you to reproduce better tends to stick around. That's all there is to it.
Do you live according to what you believe, or do you live your life according to what you lack in belief?
Question 8. Do you live in accordance with what you believe, or in accordance with your lack of belief? So, this question, I'm assuming, comes from a standpoint of belief in God. I have a lack of belief in God as an atheist. And I come at that lack of belief as a skeptic. Not enough evidence, haven't seen it, doesn't really jive with me. And if you're talking about the God of the Bible or any real Abrahamic God, I have beef with those entities, you might say. But I don't lack belief in general. There's plenty of things that I believe in, and of course I live by those beliefs. The kind of people who think that atheists don't believe in anything, well, that's straw manning of the highest order. I believe in the essential goodness of people. I believe that my friends and family are there for me. I believe in the efficacy of the scientific method. I believe in that which has been evidenced to me. And all of those things have been. And it might sound like I'm towing the atheist line or the skeptic line. Oh, evidence, evidence, evidence. But that's really all we've got to go on. But if I truly believe in something and those beliefs inform my actions, then if I have the flexibility of changing my beliefs as the evidence and the circumstances show me what is more congruent to reality, then I can make better decisions. I can live a good life according to those beliefs. And I could string them out for you, although this may not be the best arena to do so. But no, I have beliefs. I could list them out for half an hour or more, and I live by them. But belief in God isn't one of them, unless you can prove that he's there.
If God doesn't exist and the Christian dies, the Christian loses nothing. But if God does exist and you die as an atheist, do you not believe you will lose more? Will you not lose your soul?
Question 10. If God doesn't exist and the Christian dies, the Christian loses nothing. But if God does exist and you die as an atheist, do you not believe that you will lose more? Will you not lose your soul? I personally don't believe in a soul, so it's hard for me to lose something that I haven't found yet. But suppose this, because the way that I'm taking Pascal's wagers, it has to deal with my belief towards this proposition that God exists. And then presumably I'm supposed to get this immense amount of reward at the end. Suppose that God does exist, and suppose that he wants to play with his food, sets up all of these religions such that anybody that believes in Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, whatever, they're going to have infinite amount of punishment. He wants to test people on the earth to see if they buy into these. And he leaves no evidence for his existence or its existence. And what it wants to do is it wants to reward the atheists and agnostics that don't buy in to those religions. And so they get infinite amount of reward, whereas the people that buy into it get an infinite amount of punishment. If all of this is supposed to do is exhaust that, well, I have this utility by getting this belief, you're leaving out this idea that there could have been a God that exists that wants to reward people who affirm the proposition that God doesn't exist, or reserves their judgment that God doesn't exist, or reserves their judgment that God does exist and rewards them infinitely. And so then I turn it to you. How do you know that you're not waging against that God?